Hi guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to make this water bottle holder. It has these flowers here, and these aren't actually sewn on, they're worked right into the pattern, so I show you how to do that in the video. And as you could see in the pictures, it has this long strap, so I use it to put over my shoulders and then it sits nicely at my hip, but you could also make a shorter strap or attach maybe a carabiner to it, so it could attach to one of your belt loops, whatever you want to do with it. So you can see, I'll take it out of here. This is the size of my water bottle. It also works with a smaller water bottle, like a plastic one. It's just going to sit a little bit looser around it, but I still think it looks really nice and fits in there nicely. So the materials that I used is two different colors. So I have my main color and then the secondary color that I do for the flower rounds and for the top of the water bottle holder and the strap. You don't have to do it in two colors. If you just want to do it all in one color, that's completely fine. And I talk about that a little bit in the video. So for the main color here, I used this gray, and then I also used this color here, which is actually called Rose. And this one I believe is just a light gray, but it's the same kind of yarn. It's this Capri Eco Cotton yarn, and it's 85% recycled cotton and 15% polyester. I do recommend you use a cotton yarn, something with a high percentage of cotton, just because it's a little bit stronger and because it's going to be holding a water bottle. Cotton is good at absorbing water in case any spills. So you'll need two or one color of that. I just use one ball each and I still have a fair amount left over. I used a 5mm crochet hook, a yarn needle to sew in your ends, and a pair of scissors. And with that, let's get into making this floral water bottle holder. So to get started, you want to start with the main color that you chose, and you either want to start with a magic ring or start with the chaining method, which I will show you in just a moment. But I love using the magic ring, so if you'd like to do that, I'll show you quickly how to do that. So you start here with the tail of your yarn and hold that tail between your thumb and your pointer finger, and we're just going to wrap the yarn around both your pointer finger and your middle finger, wrapping it around, and then form an X on top of those two fingers, and then you're going to hold that working yarn, or the yarn that's attached to your yarn ball, out of the way with your ring finger. And then you bring in your hook, and we're going to start by placing the hook underneath right here on the X and over top of that working yarn going across that way. And we're just going to turn our hook so it's facing down and catch that yarn and pull it underneath. And while you're pulling it underneath, just twist your hook so your hook is now facing up. And then we're just going to grab that working yarn and chain one. And that's a magic ring. And then you would work the stitches that I'm going to show you pretty soon here into the center of this ring. But if you don't want to do that, you can start with a slip knot on your hook. And we're going to chain 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to slip stitch to that first chain that we made. So to slip stitch, we're just going to put our hook into that first chain that we made, grab the yarn, pull the yarn both through that chain and through the loop on your hook, and that was a slip stitch. And then we're going to chain 1. And this chain 1 in both of the methods I just showed you does not count as a stitch. So from here, if you kind of pull that ring apart, you'll see a little center opening there. and that's what we're going to work the stitches into. So whether you started with a magic ring or this chain 4 method, we're going to start working our stitches right into the center. So for round 1, we're going to start by putting 12 double crochets into the center of that ring. So to do a double crochet, we yarn over, place our hook into the center of that ring, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and yarn over, pull through 2 loops. And that's a double crochet. So that was the first one. We want to do 11 more for a total of 12 double crochets into the center of the ring. All right, I have my 12 double crochets in the center there, and if you pull your tail at this point, give it a good tug as hard as you can, that will close up that center opening there. And if it doesn't completely, don't worry about that, because we can come back at a later time and use this tail to sew around that opening, and that will close it up even more. So once you have your 12 double crochets, we're going to slip stitch to the first double crochet that we made. So not into that chain 1 that didn't count as a stitch, but into the first double crochet of the round. If you have to, you can count back 12 to make sure you're going into the first one. So again, we're just going to slip stitch into that first double crochet of the round, like so. And then we're going to chain 1, which again does not count as a stitch, and we're going to go right back into that stitch that we just slip stitched to and put 2 double crochets into it. So there's 1 and 2, both into the same stitch. And then we're going to jump to the next stitch and do 2 double crochets into that stitch. 1 and 2. And that's the repeat for round 2. It's just 2 double crochets into each stitch all the way around. All right, I'm on the final stitch of round 2. So I'm going to do my 2 double crochets into that final stitch. And I know I've made my way back around because I've hit that slip stitch and the chain 1 from the previous round. So don't get that little opening there confused for a stitch. It's actually just the slip stitch, and then you'll see that chain 1 right above it. That lets you know that you've reached the end of the round. So at the end of round 2, you should have 24 double crochets around. So again, we're going to slip stitch to the first double crochet of the round, and then we're going to chain 1. Once again, that chain 1 does not count as a stitch. And for round 3, we're going to do 2 double crochets into that first stitch that we just slip stitched to. So there's 1 and 2. And the next stitch is going to get 1 double crochet into it. And the next stitch will get 2 double crochets into it. So 1 and 2 double crochets both into the same stitch. And then jumping to the next stitch, it will get 1 double crochet into it. And that's the repeat for round 3. It's 2 double crochets into the next stitch, 1 double crochet into the next stitch, 2 into the next, 1 into the next. And we're going to repeat that all the way around. And at the end of round 3, you should have 36 double crochets around. All right, I just did my increase stitch, or 2 double crochets into the same stitch, and that next stitch is just going to get 1 double crochet. And that's how you know you did the round correctly, if you're ending in 1 double crochet and not a stitch with the 2. So again, I'm going to slip stitch to that first double crochet of the round. And we've completed the base of the water bottle. So at this point, it should kind of just cover the base. It's not going to be wider than the base. It kind of just sits really nicely at the bottom of my water bottle. So for round 4, we're going to start by chaining 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's going to count as a double crochet and a chain 1. So those 3 chains counts as the double crochet, and the 4th chain counts as a chain 1. So we're not going to do anything further into that stitch that we slip stitched into and that the chain is coming out of. We're going to skip the next stitch, and into the next stitch we're going to double crochet into that stitch. And then we're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and into the next stitch we're going to double crochet into it. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and that's actually the repeat all the way around. So again, we double crocheted chain 1, we'll skip the next stitch and double crochet into that stitch that's after the skip stitch. Chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and so on. And I'm going to repeat that all the way around. All right, I just did my final double crochet of the round. I'm going to chain 1, and you should have one final stitch to skip. Again, don't get confused with that slip stitch from the round prior. This is the final stitch here that we're going to skip, and then we're going to slip stitch into the 3rd chain of this chain 4. So if you count from the bottom, 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to slip stitch into that 3rd chain. So that leaves the 4th chain as our chain 1 spot. So just slip stitch right into that 3rd chain of the chain 4. And at this point, you should have 18 double crochets around and 18 chain 1 spaces. So for round 5, we're going to start by chaining 4, which again counts as a double crochet, chain 1. And this round is similar to what we just did for round 4. We're going to skip the chain space, and into the top of the next double crochet, we're going to double crochet into it. And then we're going to chain 1, skip the chain space, so skip, and into the next double crochet, we're going to do our double crochet. Chain 1, skip the chain 1 space, double crochet into the next double crochet. Chain 1, skip the next chain space, and so on. We'll repeat that around. All right, I just did my final double crochet and chain 1. I have one final chain space to skip, and again we're going to slip stitch into the 3rd chain of that chain 4. So counting from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, and into that chain, we are going to do a slip stitch. Like so. And for the next round, it's just a repeat of exactly what we did for round 5, or the round that we just completed. We're going to chain 4, counts as the double crochet, chain 1, skip the next chain space, double crochet into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip the next chain space, double crochet into the next double crochet. chain one, skip the next chain space, and so on. And repeat that around, and again, you should still have those 18 double crochets and 18 chain one spaces at the end of the round. All right, I've made my way back around. I have one chain space to skip right at the end of the round. Again, I'm going to slip stitch to that third chain of the chain 4 to complete the round. And I'm just going to chain one at this point and pull up my yarn a bit. And at this point, I recommend trying this around your water bottle. So you can see I have a water bottle here, and if I put it into this, it fits very nicely around mine. So you want to make sure that yours is doing the same. If it's sitting very loose, then I would recommend starting over from the beginning with a smaller hook size, or if it's just way too tight and you're having troubles getting it around your water bottle, then I recommend starting over with a larger hook size and just following the pattern exactly, but with the correct hook size. And I also have this smaller water bottle here, so if you just use water bottles, it's a little bit looser around this one, but that's completely fine. It still fits nicely into that. So going on. So again, I just chained one at the end here and pulled up my yarn, but I'm actually going to fasten off at this point. So I'll show you again. We're going to switch colors to your second color for the flower rounds, but again, if you would like to just carry on with this colored yarn, that's completely fine. Just don't fasten off at this point. So I actually fasten off for this pattern when I switch colors. You do not need to even do that. You could just switch colors in whatever way you're comfortable with at this point, because we're going to be bringing in that second color and using it. But I'm actually going to fasten off. So I just chained one. I'm going to cut my yarn, pull that yarn through, and pull tight. So we're all fastened off with the gray. So I've brought in my second color yarn here, and again, you can feel free to attach this yarn in whatever way you're comfortable with. I'm just going to insert my hook into that third chain that we just slip stitched to, and then I'm going to grab that yarn with my hook and pull up a loop, and I'm going to drop that tail. So I'm just holding on to the working yarn here, and I'm going to chain one, and I'm just going to give that tail a little tug just to make sure it's sitting nice and snug, and we're all attached with our new color. So I'm going to go back into that stitch that we just attached our new color to and do a double crochet. And I'm actually going to work over top of these tails just so I don't have to sew them in later. You don't have to. You can leave both those tails and tie them just to make sure it's more secure, but I'm actually just going to work over top of them. So we just did our first double crochet. We want 8 double crochets in a row prior to working on our flower. So I'm going to do my next double crochet into this chain space. So I'm not actually going into the chain, I'm just working right into that chain space and doing a double crochet, and that's 2. And after every couple of stitches, I'm just going to give those tails a little tug just to make sure they're working along nicely. And jumping to the next double crochet, that's 3. Get this gray yarn out of the way. And again into the chain space itself. That's 4. Again, I will give those tails a little tug. And jumping to the next double crochet, 5, double crochet into the chain space, and into the top of the next double crochet. I believe we're at, whoops, 7 at this point. I'll actually move those tails out of the way now just so it doesn't look confusing. So that's 7, I believe. 1, 2, 3. Yep. And then into the chain space, that's 8. So now into the top of the next double crochet, we're going to put 2 double crochets into that double crochet. So that's 1 and 2. And it's time to work on the flower. So to do the flower, we're going to start by chaining 2. So 1 and 2. And we're going to work the following stitches around that second double crochet that we just made. So I'm just going to turn my work a little bit here. We're going to do 2 double crochets around the post of that second double crochet that we made. So going right behind the post, we will complete our double crochet. So that was 1. We want 2. So again, we're going to yarn over, go right behind that post so it's on top of your hook, and we will do our second double crochet. And then again, we want to chain 2, 1 and 2, and we're going to slip stitch into that same space. So insert our hook there, grab the yarn, pull the yarn underneath that stitch and through the loop on your hook. And then I always give the working yarn a little tug just to tighten that slip stitch. And we just did our first petal of the flower. So we're going to work that exactly what we just did again. We're going to chain 2, 1 and 2. We're going to do our 2 double crochets around the post. So there's 1 and 2. We're going to chain 2 again, 1 and 2, and we're going to slip stitch into that same space. So inserting your hook there, grabbing the yarn, pulling it through and through the loop on your hook. And again, I just give the working end a little tug after that slip stitch, and we've completed our second petal. So now at this point, we want to work the next 2 petals around this post, which was actually the first post when we did our 2. So to do that, I'm going to start by chaining 2, which will be the start of the next petal, and then I'm going to turn my work. So turning it clockwise, so I'm able to work around this post here. And we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to yarn over, go underneath that post, so it's on top of our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and complete your first double crochet. And we want 2 double crochets. So again, working around this post here, we will do our second double crochet, and we're going to chain 2. The petals themselves don't actually chain, it's always the same thing. And then we're going to slip stitch. So go right into that space so the post is on your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull that loop through the loop on your hook. Again, give the working yarn a little bit of a tug. And if you're finding that it's getting a little bit tight, you can actually start to push over these petals if you need a little bit more space. So again, chain 2, 2 double crochets working around that post, 1 and 2, chain 2, 1 and 2, and we slip stitch. So that was our 4th petal. Now we want our 5th petal. At this point, just kind of maneuver your work so the flower is sitting how it's supposed to. You can see we have those 4 petals there. We want to do one more, and it's going to be around that same post, but we've just kind of maneuvered everything. So we're looking at the top. We will do one more petal. 1 and 2. Working right into the center of the flower. You don't even need to think about where the post is. Just work it right into the center of the flower. Do our 2 double crochets. 1. Again, move everything over if you need to, because everything gets a little bit snug. There's 2. Chain 2. 1 and 2. And we will do our slip stitch. Working right into the center of that flower. Pull up a loop and through the loop on your hook. I'm just going to kind of maneuver that petal out of the way. Again, give the working yarn a little tug. And we're going to chain 1 just to complete that flower. And you can see we now have our 5 petals. So at this point, we can just kind of move that flower out of the way. We're going to jump to the next stitch. So we did the flower in the top of this double crochet. You can see the stitches coming out of it there. We want our next double crochet to be in that chain 1 space. So again, we're just going to yarn over and double crochet into that chain 1 space, just like normal. And once again, we want 8 in a row. So that was our first. Jumping to the next one. There's 2. So that second one went in the top of the double crochet, jumping to the next chain 1 space. 3. Top of the double crochet. 4. Chain 1 space. 5. So I'm just going to work the next couple till I have 8 double crochets in a row, and then I'll come back on and I'll show you how to do a flower again. All right, I have my 8 double crochets in a row, and the final double crochet went into the top of this double crochet here. So our next flower is actually going to be in the chain space. You remember this one was worked. We did the 2 double crochets into the top of the double crochet and then worked our flower. This one's going to fall into the chain space. That's completely fine. That's how it's supposed to be. So we're going to again do our 2 double crochets into the stitch or into that chain 1 space. And again, we're going to work our flower around these 2 double crochets. So we're going to start by chaining 2, 1 and 2, turning our work a little bit so it's easier to work around this second double crochet that we made here. We're going to do our 2 double crochets worked right around that post. 1 and 2, chain 2, and slip stitch. Again, I give my working yarn a little bit of a tug. You don't have to do that. I just like keeping everything nice and snug. So there was our first petal. Going on to the second petal, it'll be worked around that same post. We're going to chain 2, 1 and 2, do our 2 double crochets around that post. 1 and 2, chain 2, and slip stitch. And give it a little tug. And that was our second petal worked around that post. Again, we want to work the next one around this post, but I'm going to start by chaining 2, 1 and 2, and then I'm going to turn my work. So I'm looking at it like this. I'm just going to turn my work So it's easier for me to work around this post here, or that first of the 2 posts. So again, we do our 2 double crochets around that post. So it'll be sitting on top of your hook. There's 1, 2, chain 2, and slip stitch into that same opening. And give a little tug, chain 2. Again, just kind of moving it over. If you give it a good push over, that will move that petal over and give you a little bit more room. Do our 2 double crochets around that post. 1 and 2, chain 2, and slip stitch into that same space. Like so. Give it a little tug. And once again, at this point, I'm just going to maneuver my work. So I'm looking at the front again. And I'm going to chain 2. And work my final petal right into the center of this flower. 2 double crochets. Chain 2. And slip stitch into the center of the flower. Give that a little tug. I'm just going to move this petal a little bit out of the way there. And chain 1 to complete your flower. And there's your 5 petals, all complete. So again, jumping to the next stitch, so remember we did that in the chain 1 space. We're going to jump to the next double crochet at this point, and we're just going to repeat. Do our 8 double crochets in a row. Into the next stitch, we do our 2 double crochets into the same stitch, whether it's the double crochet or the chain space. Work our flower around those 2 double crochets. Then we'll finish it by chaining 1 and repeating all the way around. It should end up being that you have 4 flowers at the end of this round. So I'm just going to keep working the same thing. And when I make my way back around, I will come back on and show you what to do next. All right, I just completed my final flower here. So I have the 4 around, and that last flower fell into the chain space right before we started our 8 double crochets at the beginning of the round. So that's where your final flower should be falling as well. Again, I chained 1 after I did the flower. And at this point, I'm going to change colors back to the gray. So once again, feel free to do that however you're comfortable with, but I'm actually going to fasten off. I'm going to slip stitch to that first double crochet of the round. And I'm going to chain 1, cut my yarn here, pull that yarn through and pull tight. And we're all fastened off with our second color. So again, I'm going to bring in my main color and I'm going to get that attached to that same stitch that we just slip stitched to. So I'll loop that over my hook, pull it through that stitch, and drop the tail. Grab my working yarn here, and I'm going to start round 8 by chaining 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, that chain 4 counts as a double crochet, chain 1. I'll give those 2 tails a little tug. And I also just wanted to mention, if you're not working over your tails, but you're attaching your yarn in the same way as me, all you have to do is just tie those two tails together, just so they don't become unraveled. So I'm not pulling too tight here, just till I feel a little bit of tension, and I'm actually going to double knot it just to make sure it stays nice and secure, and then I can go ahead and sew in those ends a little bit later, but you can see it tightened up that bottom stitch there, and I know that those colors won't become unraveled. And we're just going to do kind of what we were working around here, but this round 8 is going to be a little bit different because we're going to have to do stitches behind the flower, and there's not specific stitches to go into there, so I will show you what to do once we reach the flowers. So for this round, I will just sew in those tails a little bit later, just so it doesn't get confusing with them coming along. So once again, we're going to skip that next stitch and double crochet into the next stitch, and chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet into that next double crochet, chain 1, skip the next double crochet, and double crochet into the next stitch. So you can see here, we'll chain 1 again. We have one final stitch to skip, and then we've reached our flower. And you remember that flower actually went into a stitch, so we want to be putting our double crochet behind this flower. So again, we're going to skip this stitch, and I'm going to put my double crochet kind of right behind the flower here. So if I insert my hook to the left of this double crochet that we skipped, and to the right of those petals, and then just coming behind it there, that's where I'm going to do my double crochet when I need to do a double crochet behind that flower. When that flower is falling, where a double crochet needs to go. And from here, we're just going to carry on like normal. So I'm going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and the next stitch is this next double crochet after the flower, and then I'm going to double crochet into the next stitch. And I'll just keep showing you because the next flower is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet into the next, chain 1, skip the next double crochet, and double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the next stitch, and this one falls where our double crochet after the skip stitch is going to go into that double crochet to the right of the flower. So you remember on this one, that final double crochet next to the flower was the one we skipped, but on this next flower, the double crochet goes into the double crochet right next to the flower, and then we're going to chain 1 and just entirely skip over this flower because that's the next stitch. So we skip that flower, and then our next double crochet goes into the double crochet that's right next to the flower. So that will be the stitch after the skip stitch. So here it's just a chain 1 behind that flower. And then if we carry on here, the next one will end up being like that first one we did. So again, we'll chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet into the next, chain 1, skip that next stitch, and double crochet into the next. And here again you can see after we chain one. This double crochet that we're going to skip is right next to that flower. The flower is our next stitch. That means we need to do our double crochet going kind of behind that flower. So I'm going to insert my hook into this little space here, coming out behind it, and that's where I'm going to do my double crochet. Chain one, skip the next stitch, which will be this stitch next to the flower. Skip that one and double crochet into the next stitch. So I'm going to work, we'll chain one, skip the next one, and so on. I'm going to work that across here, and then I'll show you one more time because we'll be at our final flower here. All right, I'm getting close to the end here. I did a double crochet, chain one. We're going to skip that next double crochet. You can see our double crochet is going to go to this stitch right next to the flower. And we're going to chain one, and then we have one final stitch to skip, which is this flower that was put in that chain space. So again, we're just going to skip right over that flower, and then we're going to slip stitch to the third chain of that chain four. So 1, 2, 3, we will slip stitch into that chain. And now it's a little bit easier at this point. We're going to just repeat what we did for round 5 down here. So we chain 4, counts as a double crochet and chain 1, and we're going to skip that first chain space and do our double crochet into the next double crochet. Chain 1, skip the next chain space, double crochet into the next double crochet, chain 1, skip the next chain space, and so on. So you can see the flowers are no longer involved here. We're just going to work that same repeat all the way around. All right, I'm coming to the end of round 9. I just did my final double crochet and chain 1 of the round. We have one final chain space to skip, and again we're going to slip stitch to the third chain of that chain 4. So 1, 2, 3, slip stitch into that chain, and we will start round 10 by chaining 4, and we're just going to repeat what we just did for round 9. So, oops, I did chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to skip that chain space and double crochet into the next double crochet, chain 1, skip the next chain space, double crochet into the next double crochet, chain 1, skip the next chain space, and so on. All right, I'm just about back around. I just did my final double crochet and chain 1, one final chain space to skip, slip stitch to that third chain of the chain 4, and once again we want to switch back to our second color. So again, I fasten off when I switch colors. In some projects I'm going to do it with this one. So I chained 1, I'm going to cut my yarn, pull that yarn through and pull tight, and I'll bring in my pink yarn here, insert my hook into that same stitch that we just slip stitched to, and get that all attached. Drop the tail, chain 1, and again I will give both of those tails a little tug, and I'm going to go right back into that stitch that we just slip stitched to with a double crochet. And this round is going to be a little bit different than the previous round of flowers because I want the flowers on this round to kind of fall right in between the flowers from the previous round. So on this round, we want 5 double crochets in a row prior to doing that flower. So that was our first one. We'll jump to the chain space, That's 2, 1 into the top of the double crochet, 3, 4 in that chain space, and 5 in the top of the next double crochet. So we have 5 double crochets in a row, and then we make our flower in the next stitch, or in this chain 1 space. So we do our 2 double crochets right into that chain 1 space, chain 2, and start working those petals. So 2 double crochets worked around this post, chain 2, slip stitch, chain 2, again 2 double crochets worked around that same post, chain 2, and slip stitch, chain 2, turn your work so you can work around this post here, two doubles, chain 2, move that petal over a little bit, and we'll slip stitch, chain 2, 2 doubles, chain 2, and slip stitch there. Then I'm just going to maneuver it so I'm looking at it correctly, and we will do our final petal. Chain 2, going right into the center of that flower, 2 doubles, and chain 2, slip stitch, move that petal out of the way and tighten that slip stitch a little bit, and chain 1. So there's our flower that's falling in between those flowers. So at this point we're going to do 8 double crochets in a row, and that will bring us into the kind of in between these 2 flowers. So we will jump to the next stitch after the stitch that flower was worked in. So that's this double crochet here, and we will do 8 double crochets in a row, 2, 3, 4, 5, with 3 more to go here, 7, and 8 into that chain 1 space, and our next flower will be worked in the next double crochet. So we'll do our 2 double crochets into it and work our flower. So I'll go ahead and do that off camera, but again, it's going to be the flower into this stitch, and then I'm going to do 8 double crochets in a row, which will bring us in between these 2 stitches. We'll do our flower in the next stitch after those 8 double crochets, and we'll do that once again to get our final flower in between these 2 flowers, and then I'll come back on after I do the final flower over here. Alright, I just finished my final flower of the round. You can see it's still falling in between those 2 flowers. I chained 1 after making it, and you should have 3 stitches remaining. So you should have the chain 1 space, the double crochet, and then a chain 1 space, and then you've reached the beginning of the round. So I'm going to double crochet into each of those stitches. So one into that chain one space, one into the double crochet, and one into the final chain one space. And you can see here that in between all of these flowers here, there's the 8 double crochets. And if you remember, we started the round with 5 double crochets and we ended the round with 3. So those put together makes the 8 over here. So again, that's how you know you did the round correctly. So I'm going to slip stitch to that first double crochet of the round. And once again, I'm going to fasten off. So chain one, cut my yarn, pull that yarn through, pull tight, and this is how it's looking so far. You should still have, on the flower rounds, you should have 32 double crochets around and 4 of those flowers. So when I'm counting the double crochets, I'm only counting the 8 double crochets in between the flowers. I'm not counting the 2 to make the flower. So it's 32 double crochets, 4 flowers, and on the main color rounds, the kind of mesh portion here, it should be 18 double crochets and 18 chain one spaces. That should be consistent at this point. So again, we're going to bring in our main color here and get it attached to that stitch that we just slip stitched to. And pull up a loop and start the round by chaining 4 for our first double crochet and chain 1 space. Give those tails a little tug. And we're going to do essentially the same thing here that we did after this first round of flowers. So we just work around as normal here. So we're skipping the next stitch and double crocheting into that next stitch. And again, I'm going to drop my tails and get those tied and sewn in a little bit. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, which happens to be the double crochet to the right of that flower. So our chain 1, because we're thinking of this flower as 1 stitch, is going to go behind that flower. So we chained 1, we're going to skip the flower and double crochet into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip a stitch, double into the next. I'll show you one more flower here. Chain 1, skip, and double into the next. Chain 1, skip, double, and then just like that first, oops, I kind of snagged that flower a little bit, that's okay. Just like the first round of flowers, it's going to be different on 2 of the flowers. So this one we chained 1 and we skipped over the flower. This one it falls where I'm just going to chain 1 after that double crochet. We have 1 final stitch to skip before we reach that flower. So we're going to skip that stitch, and we know our double crochet needs to go behind that flower again, like so. Chain 1. The next stitch to be skipped is that double crochet after the flower. So we skip that one and double crochet into the next. So I'm going to complete this off camera. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and so on. And we are currently on round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I'm going to complete round 12, and then round 13 and round 14 is the same as round 9 and round 10. So we're just going to be doing these 3 total rounds of this mesh stitch, and I'm going to work that off camera. All right, I just completed round 14, so you can see I have my 3 rounds with the gray. And once again, we're going to do our 3rd flower round. This will be the final one that we do. I'm going to bring in my pink yarn, get this all attached. And on this round, we're going to be starting with 2 double crochets in a row. So I'm going to go right back into that same stitch I just attached my yarn to and do my first double crochet. Give those tails a tug. Do 1 more double crochet into that chain space, and then the next stitch here we'll get the flower. So 2 into this stitch, 1 and 2, and we're going to work our flower, which I'm going to do off camera. And then after the flower, it's going to be again 8 double crochets in a row, and then into the 9th stitch we'll do our 2 double crochets and the flower and repeat around. And once again, when we make our way around here, the final flower will be in between these, and then the stitches after with the 2 that we started will equal 8 double crochets in a row. So I'm going to work this off camera. I'm also going to work the next 3 rounds off camera as well after this flower round. So we are on round 15 right now, which is the flower round. I'm then going to work my 3 rounds of with the gray, this kind of mesh stitch here. So if you need to, you can rewind the video to see how we do these 3 rounds. The round after this one's going to be exactly the same, where we are either chaining 1 and skipping the flower, or doing our double crochet behind the flower, depending on where it falls with our counting, and then do the 2 rounds with the gray, where it's a little bit easier. So I'm going to work that off camera. Once I've completed these 4 rounds total, I will come back on and show you the next step. All right, I'm just coming to the end of round 18. I did my final double crochet, chain 1. I'm going to slip stitch to that 3rd chain of the chain 4, and at this point I'm going to fasten off with my gray. You can continue working the top rounds of single crochet and the strap with whatever color you want. I'm going to do it with my secondary color, so the pink, but again, that's completely up to you. So I'm going to cut my yarn, pull that yarn through, and pull tight. And I will insert a picture on screen here to show where this water bottle holder is sitting on my water bottle at this point. So I'm going to bring in my pink yarn here, and again I'm going to attach it to that same stitch that I just slip stitched to, and we're going to work up some rounds of single crochets. So just drop my tail. I'm going to chain 1, give those tails a tug. I'm going to go back into that same stitch that we just slip stitched to with a single crochet. So to do a single crochet, I'm just going to insert my hook into that stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. And then again, I'm going to jump to the chain 1 space, and we're going to single crochet right into that space. And I'm just working over my tails so I don't have to sew those in later. Single crochet into that chain 1 space, jump to the next double crochet, and do a single crochet. And that's what we're going to repeat around for round 19 here. It's just one single crochet into each double crochet and chain space all the way around. All right, I've just about made my way back around here. I just have this final chain space to do my final single crochet of the round in, and then we're going to slip stitch to that first single crochet of the round. So make sure you're not going into that chain one, but the first actual single crochet of this round. We'll do our slip stitch, chain one, and I'm just going to work up a couple of rounds of what we just did. So it's one single crochet into each stitch all the way around. So starting in that first stitch that we just slip stitched to, we'll go back into that stitch and do a single crochet and just single crocheting into each stitch all the way around. And when you make your way back around and complete your final one prior to that slip stitch, we'll slip stitch to the first single crochet of the round and repeat. I'm not sure yet how many rounds I'm going to do, so I'm going to build up a couple of rounds here, and when I come back on, I'll tell you exactly how many I did. Okay, so I did 5 rounds total, and I just wanted to show you where it's sitting on my water bottle at this point. So you can see the top kind of goes right up to where that lid portion is, and I will remove it. And after the 5th round, I slip stitched to that first round, or sorry, the first single crochet of the round, and I chained one. So just like we did for the previous rounds of single crochet. And at this point, I'm going to start working on the strap. So to do the strap, again, we slip stitch to that first stitch of the round. I chained one. I'm going to go back into that same stitch that we just slip stitched to with a single crochet, and I'm going to do 4 single crochets in a row. So this is the second, 3, and 4. I will mention, if you want the strap to sit somewhere different, you can fasten off after you slip stitched and chained one. You can fasten off and attach your yarn to anywhere around the top here. So maybe you want a certain side of this showing and you want the straps to be somewhere different. Feel free to attach the yarn anywhere and do this. I'm just going to do the straps right here. So I did my 4 single crochets in a row. I'm going to chain one. I'm going to turn my work, and I'm going to single crochet back into that very first stitch, and we're just going to single crochet our way across the 4 stitches total that we did. So this is the 3rd, and then the final one will go right into this final single crochet, which can be a little bit tight because that was the first one that I did after the slip stitch, but it'll be easier after that one. So there's our 4 single crochets in a row, chain one, turn your work, and at this point we're just going to keep working this back and forth. So 1 single crochet into that first stitch, jumping to the next stitch, single crochet, single crochet into the next stitch, and single crochet into this final stitch. So you should have 4 stitches at the end of each row, and I'm just going to keep repeating rows and rows and rows of this, turning my work and repeating. chain one, turn your work, repeat, chain one, turn your work, repeat, so on. And I'm going to keep working this up until my strap is long enough to sit. I want the water bottle sitting where the top is sitting right at kind of right above my hips or my lower waist. So I'm going to keep working this up until it fits up and around my shoulder and back down where this is sitting comfortably at my waist. You can do as many rows as you want. I'll let you know in just a moment how many rows I end up doing. All right, I just finished my big long strap here. It's folded in half, just so I can get it into the camera view a little bit better. And I ended up doing 159 rows, and that is measuring at 37 inches. And that's when I'm not stretching the band. So just from the base here, all the way here to the end, when it's not folded, it's measuring 37 inches. So at this point, we want to get this band attached to the opposite side. So you can see here, this is where we started the strap. So that's that stitch that we slip stitched to. We did our first single crochet and did 4 in a row. And I did mention in that clip, you could do that anywhere. So just starting at the final single crochet of that first row of the 4, we're going to count over 14 stitches. So starting in the stitch after that 4th single crochet, we'll count 1, 2, 3, and 14. So we're going to start attaching our strap to the stitch after that 14th stitch. So I guess in the 15th stitch is where we're going to attach the opposite side of the strap. So feel free to put a stitch marker in here. I don't have one next to me, so I'm just gonna make sure to, I'll pull up that stitch a little bit to make sure to keep an eye on it. So without twisting your band, we're just going to fold it over, and I will insert my hook again, and I want to do the stitches on the inside of the work, so it's not, so these slip stitches are not seen on the outside. So I'm just going to fold this strap in this way, and then that way the stitches along here, when I put the strap back up, will be on the inside. And you can feel free to sew the strap, whatever you would like to do. I'm just going to go ahead and slip stitch. So to do that, I'm going to insert my hook. I chained 1 after that final single crochet that I did, chained 1. I'm going to insert my hook into that first stitch of the next row, and I'm also going to insert it into that stitch that again was the stitch after we counted over 14. So that 15th stitch, I'm going to insert my hook into that stitch as well, and I'm going to pull the yarn through both of those stitches and through the loop on my hook, like so. And that's a slip stitch. So we have our first 2 stitches attached. And jumping to the next stitch on the strap, I'm going to insert my hook into that next stitch on the strap, the next stitch over here on the water bottle holder, and I'm going to pull the yarn through both of those stitches and through the loop on my hook. Again, jumping to the next stitch on the strap, the next stitch on the water bottle holder, and do our slip stitch. And one final one here, the last stitch on the strap, the last stitch, or the next stitch on that water bottle holder, pull the yarn through both of those stitches and through the loop on your hook. And then I'm going to fasten off. So I'm going to chain 1, cut my yarn, pull that yarn through and pull tight. I'll get that sewn in a little bit. And you can see when I put it right side out, you're not seeing those slip stitches. So the other side here looks nice and clean. And again, feel free to sew this if you're not liking the look. Anything like that will work just fine. So, and if we count over, we should have, so we have the 14 stitches in between these two straps, and on the other side, we should also have 14 stitches. So starting in the stitch after that final slip stitch that we did, count over 1, 2, 3, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, and perfect. And we've reached that slip stitch. So we have 14 stitches in between the two sides of the straps. And we have our strap that is not twisted, all ready to go and attach to our water bottle holder. So at this point, I'm just going to turn my water bottle holder inside out, and I'm going to get all of those tails sewn in. So if you're like me and did not do the mess as you went, now is the time to do that. And remember at the beginning, I mentioned that if you do have a little bit of a gap there, if you sew this tail here, just around these stitches, around that opening, and then keep giving it a tug, you'll see that center opening close completely. And again, I'm just going to make sure all these tails are knotted, which I believe they are. Some of these are already sewn in, and I can just go ahead, like this one here, for example, I worked over, so I can just cut those. But these ones that I tied, where's one? Here's one. I'm just going to go ahead and get all of those sewn in. Anything that's already worked over, I'll get those ends cut, and then I will turn this right side out again, and we'll look at our final project. So I got all of my ends sewn in, I turned it right side out, and we're all complete. I hope you love your water bottle holder that you created, and thank you so much for watching my video. Please consider liking this video and subscribing if you found this video helpful, and so you don't miss any of my future tutorials. But I'll otherwise see you in my next video. Bye!